Albert Betts is not a well-known artist, but in terms of Mortlake, he is very important. When I first came to Mortlake, I kept coming across drawings by Albert Betts, in books, in the History Society archives, and at Richmond Local Studies. But they were scattered, and there was no catalogue, and little was written about Albert himself. In this talk, I am going to show you many of Albert's local drawings, mainly from between 1892 and 1903, and tell you something about Albert himself. Albert Betts was very much a Mortlake artist. He did not take his sketch pad into Barnes or Richmond. But by Mortlake, I mean the area on this map, including East Sheen and much of Richmond Park. For centuries before the coming of the railway, the first view many a visitor would have of Mortlake was from the river. This 1895 drawing of the bend in the river shows a coal barge in the foreground, with the bargeman and his dog presumably waiting for the high tide. But zooming in, we see Mortlake dominated by the brewery with its high smoking chimney. To the left we can identify the parish church and the Queen's Head pub. To the right we see the ship and the houses along Thames Bank. The building of Chiswick Bridge, which opened in 1933, changed this view dramatically. But some scenes have changed very little. This is the ship pub and the brewery's maltings building today. And this is how Albert drew them in 1903, the year the malt house was built. Not much has changed. But if we go up Ship Lane, between the maltings and the pub, this is Betts' drawing at the top of the lane. The Jolly Gardeners on the right was rebuilt in 1922, and the houses opposite were demolished around the time of the First World War. Ship Lane as it meets the Lower Richmond Road today. And a photograph of the lost buildings opposite Ship Lane. Just across the green we have the Bootmakers' Almshouses, viewed from the London platform of Mortlake Station. Across the green, at the start of the High Street. And this is what it looks like now. The left-hand side is much the same, though with cars rather than carts, and a more complicated traffic management system. But the right-hand side has changed completely. The old High Street buildings were demolished in the 1960s to widen the road. But we are not going down the High Street just yet. We are going round the back to the Wigan Hall, centre of Mortlake's community life for much of the 20th century, a favourite venue for wedding receptions. Sadly, it was demolished in 1969. And this is the site today. Further on, we have Albert in nostalgic mood. The title, Old Mortality, the style, the figure and the colour all suggest a passing age. And he was right. The charming back to the high street today. It's enough to drive you to drink. A quiet lunchtime in the Old George, one of many pubs in Mortlake High Street. And this was the Old George just before it was demolished in 1968. This is the Mortlake National Schools. On the right is the converted workhouse. On the left, the junior school. This is the same view today. Mortlake Hall on the left, Capel Court on the right, the old workhouse converted into sheltered housing. Another view of the schools in 1903, but what interests me is the cottage on the left. In 1851, Matthew Morris, a chimney sweep, was living there with his wife Hannah and their son Reuben, aged 3. By 1881, the cottage is recorded as Laburnum Cottage, and Reuben is running the business. He and his wife Clara have 5 children. Reuben died before the next census in 1891, and Clara took over the chimney sweep business. The Morris family was still living in Laburnum Cottage when Albert drew this picture. Those of you who know Mortlake may recall another multi-generation family of chimney sweeps, the Vines. Are they the same family? I've never been able to establish a family link, but then I found this photograph. It's on the junction of St Leonard's with Sheen Lane. But look at the sign on the corner. Where is this cottage? Initially that puzzled me. I've never seen a photograph of any cottage like this. Did Albert Betts make this up? But there are some clues. Barton on the building to the left. C. Bass on the building to the right. And the spire of a building behind. We've seen this spire before on Mortlake National Schools. So the cottage must be on the south side of the high street. But let's look at some further information. This is Kelly's directory for 1896. Between Mrs. Charlotte Bass, a china and glass warehouse, and Alfred Barton, a watchmaker, there was a house on the high street occupied by Robert Storkey. There is also a reference to this cottage in Anderson's Rambles Through Mortlake. Old Waxham, the narrator, has been talking to his granddaughter about old Poulter, the mole catcher. He had a brother who was also a mole catcher, who lived in an old-fashioned cottage on the south side of the high street, which is so very low and stands back from the pathway next Woods the clockmaker, which is now Barton's. So this is Robert Storkey's house now, formerly occupied by Mr. Poulter. But there is something else interesting about the extract from Kelly's directory. Albert Betts lived 2 doors away, at 66 the High Street. This is a house he lived at for much of his life. Though Albert didn't exactly live here at the bike shop, but in the middle of the road. The south side of Mortlake High Street was demolished in the 1960s when the road widened. I think Albert deserves a blue plaque. What more do we know about Albert Betts? The censuses tell us quite a lot about Albert. He appears in 7 censuses between 1841 and 1901. His baptism record shows that 2 twin boys, Albert and Edwin, were born on the 13th of August 1835 at 38 Coleshill Street, Belgravia. Family historians may realise that this was the year before birth certificates were introduced. The twins were baptised at St Luke's, Chelsea, which is the church where Charles Dickens was married. Albert's boyhood was spent in Belgravia. Coleshill Street became Eaton Terrace. But this is not the very wealthy Eaton Place or Eaton Square, but mainly occupied by people in trades. Albert's parents were tailors, and this house was quite close to the Stag Brewery near Victoria Station. Albert doesn't seem to have been very good at arithmetic. As the censuses are held every 10 years, his ages should be 25, 35, 45 and 65 in the censuses. Albert was a barrister's clerk at 15, but then had a career in drawing as an artist, a lithographer and a draftsman. He married and lived for a while in Gravesend, but not for long, judging by the birth dates of his children. His wife Elizabeth was a linguist, sometimes pretentiously so. Albert lived for 20 to 30 years in the same house in Mortlake High Street. Julia, his daughter, married Francis Haddock, who lived with the Betts. This is Albert's birthplace. Perhaps another blue plaque is called for. In later years, drawing was mostly a recreation. But what of Albert's work? The database of local building planning applications throws up one instance of Albert as an architect. In 1894, when Mr. John Collins, a pork butcher, applied to construct an outbuilding for the slaughter of pigs, Albert did the architect's drawings. His signature is at the bottom. If we look again at our extract from Kelly's directory, we see Collins the pork butcher a few doors down the high street from where Albert lived. This is Albert Betts' drawing of St Mary the Virgin Church, Mortlake. But it is quite different from today's church, as it was substantially rebuilt in 1906. This is the Beechcroft Church of 1840. It looks elegant to me, but according to Walter Furnow, the vicar at the time, and probably the man in the drawing, it was inconvenient, unsightly, dark and ill-ventilated. And this is the church today. But some things don't change. We can clearly see the Bouchier font in Albert's drawing, and we can still see it today. And Betts made several drawings of the exterior of St Mary's, the tower, the churchyard arch, the vestry building, and Sidmouth's tomb, which has now lost its railings. This picture of the Queen's Head, with the tapestry house and the church behind, is a lithograph of Albert Betts from around 1877. And this looks like a preliminary sketch for it. But everything else which survives of Albert's work is much later. At the eastern end of Mortlake High Street stood Marsham Lodge, which dates back to the time of Elizabeth I. It is described as the last house, as the boundary with Barnes runs down White Hart Lane. Dr. Mackintosh lived there. The house was demolished in 1930 for road widening. The White Hart pulled down and replaced shortly after this picture was drawn. Going up White Hart Lane, we come to Priest's Bridge. This marks the boundary between Mortlake parish and Putney parish. The plaque on the bridge even naming the church wardens, including one Eustace Anderson. Why this interest in the Mortlake boundary? It is down to this man, John Eustace Anderson. The survival of Albert Betts' drawing owes a great deal to him. He was the son of Eustace Anderson, who features on the Priest's Bridge plaque. Anderson was a solicitor by profession, clerk to the Mortlake Vestry, and then clerk and solicitor to Barnes Urban District Council. Anderson took a great interest in the history of the district, publishing his History of the Parish of Mortlake in 1886. He amassed a large collection of Surrey prints. His collection included several drawings and prints by Albert Betts, some of which he commissioned, and these are now in the Local Studies collection at Richmond. Anderson also wrote Rambles Through Mortlake by Old Waxham, the cobbler, passages which link to Albert's drawings, recall the sub-sunk cottage, and that of Morris the chimney sweep. Anderson must have known Betts well. He would have passed his house on the way to work. He commissioned drawings from Betts, but he obviously didn't like people in the drawings he commissioned. This is Betts' drawing of Ship Lane, and this is the version in the Anderson collection without the people and the horses. Crossing the Upper Richmond Road, we have Albert's nostalgic drawing Vanishing Palewell, looking from Upper Richmond Road into East Sheen Avenue. Today, Vanishing Palewell is still a tree-lined street, but rather filled with cars. The Richmond Local Studies version of Palewell Common, in a bit of a mess, coffee stains or whatever. And this is after I cleaned it up. Palewell Common looks similar today, with people still walking their dogs. This country house in the middle of Palewell was the only one of the East Sheen grand houses that Betts drew. Palewell Lodge was built in the 18th century and pulled down in 1925 and replaced with these houses in Sunbury Avenue. The Sheen Gate to Richmond Park, and the scene today, a bigger house but still with a picket fence. Bog Lodge, Holly Lodge, or for Betts, Sawyer's Lodge, named after the park keeper's family who lived there. Bog Gate, a meticulous drawing of Bog Gate, showing Betts as an architectural draftsman. The background is looking through Sheen Common to the chimneys on the riverside. The gate today, the trees in Sheen Common block the view. We now know this as the old farmhouse, or number 6, Fife Road. The farmland between the Upper Richmond Road and Sheen Common was divided up into plots and developed in the 1850s. The farmhouse was very much altered in Victorian times. It was named the Gables and was let to Sir Giles Bagot, first Commissioner of Lunacy, who lived there for half a century. And this is the same view today. Trees totally obscuring the house. If you look over the fence, you can see that the house is very similar to that in the drawing. Rudolf Nureyev bought the house in 1967 and used it at his London home until 1982. It was sometimes the venue for wild parties. During the filming of Romeo, a company member recalls. There was one hell of a shindig going on at Rudy's house, and by dawn there were bodies all over the place. They'd all passed out in various states of drunkenness. Apparently, Rudy's bedroom had this great big Elizabethan four-poster bed. Suddenly a very dainty, beautifully dressed lady could be seen delicately stepping over the debris to open the double doors, and there was Rudolf, lying naked between 7 tattooed Martelots from the East End, dead to the world. Margot Fontaine took hold of Rudy's big toe and waggled it and said, "Rudolf, dear, it's time to get up. We have to film the balcony scene." The full title of this drawing is View of Blind Lane with Messrs. Barker's Market Gardens. We can see the brewery in the background. And this is Blind Lane today, now renamed Temple Sheen Road. But given the parked cars, Blind Lane was not such an inappropriate name after all. But there are parts of East Sheen that haven't changed much since Albert's day. These are the Merton cottages. And this is them today. And Christchurch. Much the same today, except for a bit of tree growth. The interior of Christchurch. Quite similar today. Coulston's Almshouses at the junction of Upper Richmond Road and Sheen Lane. And this is Milestone Green today. Can you spot the similarities? I think there is only one, the milestone itself. Turning left into Upper Richmond Road, we come to a pub called the Five Alls. After the king, I rule all. The bishop, I pray for all. The lawyer, I plead for all. The soldier, I fight for all. And the peasant, I feed all. This is the site today. Straying slightly outside of the Mortlake parish boundary, we have the Black Horse and the Triangle. There's still a triangular junction there, but the Black Horse is now apartments. Where is this barn and school out in the country? It's at Chalker's Corner. This house in Williams Lane is usually called the Elms, but Albert, as before, has his own name for it, Impey's House, after Michael Impey, who lived there in the mid-19th century. It was demolished in 1930 by Watneys. For many years, it was an international bowls arena. It was derelict land for many decades, but Wadham Mews was built there in 2011. So that's what happened to Albert's Mortlake. But what happened to Albert himself? He was quite prolific in 1903. There are 10 drawings from that year, but nothing after that. The Kelly's Directory for 1903-4 is the last to record Albert Betts at 66 Mortlake High Street. His daughter Julia and son-in-law Francis Haddock, plus 3 grandchildren, were living with them. In Kelly's for 1904-5, Francis Haddock is the householder at 9 Traherne Road. So by 1905, Albert and his wife Elizabeth were living with their daughter-in-law Julia and son-in-law Francis Haddock. On Wednesday, the 28th of February 1906, Albert had his tea at 5:15, and at 5:45 went out, as he usually did, for a walk around the houses. I suspect he turned into Upper Richmond Road and walked past the scenes of several of his drawings. Vanishing Palewell, Milestone Green, the Five Alls, and the Black Horse. Quite what happened after that we do not know, but he was found at 9:15 lying dead on the side of the railway by St Mary's Grove footbridge, about a quarter of a mile from Richmond Station. The police were unable to find out how Albert got onto the line. There were no signs of a struggle. At the inquest, Mr Scott, Inspector of the Police Department at Waterloo, was of the opinion that Albert was knocked down by a train which flung him to the side of the track. The jury returned a verdict of accidental death. The Richmond Herald and Richmond Twickenham Times both reported the inquest, although the Herald managed to call him Alfred. Julia Caroline Haddock, Albert's daughter, gave evidence which tells us a bit more about Albert in his last years. She describes him as a photographer. He had been in fairly good health with no illness since he had been living with them, but 4 months previously he had started to suffer from loss of memory. When he was on business, she said, he used to travel from Mortlake to Waterloo, and on several occasions he had been found on the railway. Because of these memory losses, Julia had put his name and address inside his coat pocket. Neither Julia's evidence nor the 2 newspaper articles say anything about Albert having been an artist. Julia at the inquest refers to her father as a photographer. Perhaps he bought a camera in 1903 and stopped drawing. Or perhaps the reporters misheard Julia, who had described her father as a lithographer. Within 2 months, his wife Elizabeth had also died. The Haddocks remained at 9 Traherne Road until 1914, but they were not there in the 1915 Kellys. Francis Haddock died in April 1914 and is buried in the same grave as Albert and Elizabeth in Old Mortlake burial ground. This is the Betts grave in the Old Mortlake burial ground, quite near to the Avenue Gardens entrance. There is no headstone, but Albert and his wife and son-in-law are named on the side stones. But in seeing the grave, the surprise is that Caroline Julia's name was added later. She died in Vancouver, Canada in 1951, aged 89. The passenger records show that she left Southampton on the 10th of August 1923 on the Osona, destination Canada. She appears to be travelling alone. Her youngest son Kenneth would have been 23 by then. So Albert leaves us little trace of his life. He is not famous enough artist to be mentioned in any directory of artists, nor to merit an obituary. He is only mentioned in the local paper because of the bizarre and mysterious nature of his death, not because of who he was. But though little of his life has come down to us, what we do have is nearly 40 drawings of what Mortlake was like in the years around 1900. Some scenes we can still see today, others which have vanished forever. I will leave you with a colourful reminder of Albert's work.